All right, is what you're seeing now, a little bit of flashback coverage of the Miracle on Hudson. Remember this from back in 2009? A U.S. Airways flight jet made a safe landing on the river after the plane slammed into a flock of birds, leaving both engines disabled. Look, since the dawn of aviation, planes colliding with birds and other creatures has been a concern for pilots and passengers alike, of course. According to the latest report from the FAA, wildlife strikes have reached their second highest level in over a decade, and that's costing the industry about $400 million every year. Worldwide, that cost is more than $1 billion. Skylar Henry took flight to see what's being done in the air and here on the ground to help keep the skies safe.
South Jersey traffic, Cessna 105 on roll 26.
When she's not flying 737s for a commercial airline, you can spot First Officer Joanna Marmon up here, training aspiring pilots in a two-seater Cessna.
It's still safer to fly than to drive.
Part of the in-flight classroom training at her and her husband's flight school, Beyond Aviation, keeping your head on a swivel for weather, other aircraft, and birds.
So we're at 3,000 feet.
Experts say 3,000 feet in the air is where a majority of wildlife strikes happen. And in recent years, according to the FAA, the number of strikes is back up above pre-pandemic levels, with more than 17,000 just last year.
I had one bird strike in my professional career. It was surprising. I happened to just glance down at the second that it was coming towards the airplane. As I looked up, I saw a blur and I heard a loud bang.
Wow.
The airplane itself didn't care. It was really a moot point.
The reality is most bird strikes are anticlimactic, but on occasion they can be unsettling, even for military aircraft. The FAA says the strikes shouldn't be ignored, adding it's important for all pilots to report them. While the strikes mostly happen mid-air, many of the precautions are taken on the ground.
This is the GA, or General Aviation runway right here.
USDA biologist Casey Kerr works the grounds at BWI Airport. He took us on the tarmac to look out for different types of wildlife, especially birds of prey.
What are we looking at here?
So this is a Swedish goshawk raptor trap. We've caught nearly 100, 120 in a year, and they're banded and relocated. We try to take them, give or take 50 miles from the airport.
Although not the most common, vultures, geese, and hawks pose the highest risk to aircraft in this area. Kerr is a team of one, managing about 3,500 acres in and around the airport, and is eagle-eyed about potential dangers.
We have 12 cannons on the airfield itself, and we primarily try to cover the approach and the departure ends of the runways.
Known as the hot spots. But chances are you wouldn't notice these sound cannons when you're on board a flight. Dozens of airports have them. The remote-controlled loud booms usually shoo flocks away.
If a pilot were to strike a bird on rotation or after they've committed to being in the air, that's the worst-case scenario.
While the techniques to keep birds at bay continue to evolve, the issue of bird versus plane has been around for more than 120 years.
You know, the Wright brothers struck the first and documented the first wildlife strike. Red-winged blackbird, which was here on the airfield today when we drove around. We're kind of battling nature in a sense with this.
How important is it that pilots are vigilant themselves when recording strikes?
Oh, it's extremely important. We generally become aware of strikes by one of two ways. Either USDA or airport operations finds a strike that may have occurred, or more often than not, the pilots report the strikes. If we can identify that here on the field, we will. If we have any doubts at all, we will send those remains to the Smithsonian.
How excited are you when there's a new package in the mail?
Oh, it's like Christmas every day.
Carla Dove, a pure coincidence of a last name, is the program director of the Feather Identification Lab at the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C. Samples ranging from feathers to tissue and even whole birds are sent in. On average, 40 cases a day are processed here.
Once we know the species, we know how much it weighs on average. We know what it eats. We know what it's doing in a certain area, and that information is very valuable to the airport biologists that are on the airports and to the engineers who are designing the aircraft.
And why is that?
If you know how much a bird weighs and you know which birds are causing the damage, then you can design your engines or your aircraft parts to withstand a certain bird weight at a certain speed.
The collection of specimens within the Feather Identification Lab is more than 150 years old.
This is one of the largest bird collections in the world. In this room, we have about 500,000 specimens of birds.
But there are more than just birds throughout these rows for reference. The lab has other animals here too.
We have a lot of bats in our wildlife strikes. And last year, we had almost 700 events that had bats.
Laid out in front of me are some of the birds most frequently struck in the D.C. and Baltimore areas, including red-tailed hawks.
We had one of these in a bird strike just the other day.
And orioles.
I find it so interesting that even these small birds here can be involved in a strike like that, and you all are keeping it on record.
Data is so powerful, and the more data you have, the better your information is going to be.
Data that's key to the national coordinator for the Airport Wildlife Hazards Program, Mike Beeger.
It's one of the biggest databases in the world. It's in some circles, it's considered the gold standard.
Beeger's office oversees the National Wildlife Strike Database. To date, more than 280,000 strikes have been recorded. And he says the communication among the airports and pilots, wildlife management teams, and the Feather Identification Lab is critical. He'd know. Beeger helped with the NTSB investigation into the Miracle on the Hudson.
Did data collection and reporting change after the Miracle on the Hudson?
Strike reporting has increased remarkably since then.
What's behind the uptick in the numbers altogether?
Following the Miracle on the Hudson event, there was a great awareness of wildlife strike issues at airports and to airplanes, and then the conservation success in the United States. So as we fly more, we're encountering more of these birds in the air.
Despite the rise in reports, the number of damaging strikes has come down ever since wildlife biologists joined the airports. But even they are exploring ways to get strikes down altogether. But for now, pilots are going to have to continue to rely on their Hawkeye training to keep the battle for airspace at bay.
Would you like to fly?
Sure.
Okay. That is what straight and level looks like.
Nice.
And that's it. You're turning. You're flying.
For CBS Saturday Morning, I'm Skylar Henry over the friendly skies.
Great report, Skylar. Pilots like Jeff, stay safe up there. We'll be right back.